Okay, welcome back to part three of today's class. Like the dumbass that I am, I forgot to put my phone on airplane mode, and I just got a call from I don't even know who called. So, anyway, here we are. Okay. The number one rule of elite interviewing is you just want to have a conversation. All right. You can say anything in that conversation to keep it going with a couple parameters. All right. Parameter number one is you obviously want them to stay on topic. Parameter number two, you need to follow ethics. You don't lie. You don't misrepresent yourself. You're not trying to have an aha moment where you bust them, right? Like it's what they want to tell you, and just be ethical about it. Be a decent human being about it. Three is that you want to bias their answers as little as possible. And we'll talk about how to do that in the course of this. All right. Number one thing to remember, what do you do beforehand to get ready for an elite interview? How do you schedule the interview? How do you contact a person? I recommend sending an introductory letter or email to somebody, preferably on letterhead. It establishes you as official, okay? It establishes you as a serious candidate. Some people will tell you that you should do the phone call first. I would say that you are doing, I would send the email first because it lets people get to know you in their own time, right? Your first introduction allows them to control, because an email you can ignore until you're ready to read it, right? A phone call is kind of intrusive. I like sending an email first and then saying in the email, look, I will call you to see if we can set up an interview in about a week. All right. I do recommend that follow-up call because sometimes people read emails and even if they want to help, they forget about it because it's easy to forget about emails. We call them afterwards. It's a good idea. All right. Say you get your interview scheduled. Before you have any real interaction with this person, you need to do your background research on them and on the concept that you really are asking them about. All right? The interview is to get information that goes beyond the basics. It is not to get the basic information that you could find on Wiki or by doing a quick internet search to find statistics to find the available statistics on local governments. Okay, the goal here is to create new knowledge, something that we can't find out anywhere else. So why in the world should you ask this person about something that anyone can find on a Google search? All right, you don't go asking a community leader about information that is freely available and prominent on their website. When you do that, your interview subject, the elite, will not respect you. They will not take you as a serious interviewer. They will resent you for wasting their time. Now, on the flip side of that, if you do your homework before the interview, all right, the expert will respect you and probably will want to talk to you. All right? This is what this person does probably every day or very regularly over a long period of time. That someone actually cares to ask about it is awesome, right? It feels great. Think about if somebody asked me what it was like to be a yoga teacher and what it's like to practice yoga, dude, I can talk about that stuff all day. Literally just wind me up and go. And I would love the ability to talk about that. If somebody showed me that they had done some serious background, had done a little bit of background reading on yoga, because yoga is a huge topic, I would really respect that. And I would love the opportunity to have an in-depth conversation, because I don't get to have those very often, right? You're offering somebody the opportunity to talk with what they care about with someone else who cares about the same thing. It's incredibly flattering. It's incredibly intellectually stimulating. Most people who you want to interview, if you show that you're a serious student, very happy to talk to you. All right? Now, let's talk about once you get the interview, once you've set it up, once you've done your background research, what's the interview like? Well, first thing we need to talk about is your mannerisms, okay? Body language. In general, you want a body language that keeps people at ease. Eye contact is very, very good, but not the creepy, like, eye contact, right? You want to maintain natural eye contact. Squaring your shoulders to the person, sitting up, right, which I just wasn't doing, and having an open position, right? Don't cross your arms, all right? Sit natural. When you like this, you're closed off, you're kind of hostile, you're suspicious. When you sit down with kind of like an open chest, shoulders back, but not unnatural, right? You want to convey the air of relaxation, exactly the way that you would be chatting with one of your friends, right? If you were giving your friends your full attention. Try not to cross your legs. If you're wearing a skirt or something like that, it's appropriate to cross your legs. Obviously, ladies, you know and perhaps gentlemen, know the way to handle that. An open body image that portrays you as a kind, or an open body language that portrays you as a kind listener is what you're striving for. You're also searching for what Fenno called rapport. You're searching for a good working relationship. You want people to say, not that I'm going to be this person's friend necessarily, but that I like this person. And in order for somebody to like you, you have to demonstrate humanity. One of my favorite things if I'm doing an interview is if I come in and I see that somebody has pictures on their desk, all right? And pictures of kids, right? People will talk about their kids forever. And people love talking about their kids. So I walk in, the first time I did this elite interviewing, I was a grad student from Princeton, right? And I'm doing these interviews of Vermont school board members. They get this initial letter that says, this guy from Princeton's coming. There aren't that many guys from Princeton. It has sort of an elite, snooty reputation. I was conscious of that, and I wanted to diffuse that as soon as possible to establish myself as a real person who cared about what they were doing. Talking about the family, that's what people do, talking about the water cooler. If you're a sports guy, talk about sports. My favorite story ever was this one guy, I sent him out to do an interview, and he was a good old South Carolina boy, right? Like played baseball on the Wake Forest baseball team, and he loved fish. He's actually a fly fishing guide right now. He walked into some guy's office that he wanted to interview, and the guy had like the fish mounted above his desk. He had fishing pictures. And my student was just like, yeah, I was in. It was easy. Like I talked to him about fishing for 5 minutes, and then he'd tell me whatever you want. When you talk about real life stuff, when you get rapport, they let their guard down. And that's critical in this type of thing. All right. Now, there is some controversy about when you're in an interview, whether or not to record the interview or not. All right. On one hand, tape recorders, voice recorders, catch everything, including pauses, including tone of voice and everything. And you know that afterwards you can go back and listen and know that you have a full record of what transpired. All right. The disadvantage of a voice recorder is that it may make people nervous, right? You always have to, always, I can't stress this enough, ask people before you start to record an interview. Ask them if they're comfortable with that. Even if they say they're comfortable, they may spend a couple minutes just kind of looking at the tape player, right? Suspicious of the tape player. Suspicious of the voice recorder. I keep saying tape player because I am old. So let's say you don't use a voice recorder. Let's say you just take notes. All right. Notes are casual, particularly if you're not trying to scroll. You don't want to take notes. You're scrolling down everything they said. You want to scroll down just enough so that you can remember the main points here if you're taking notes. People might say stuff they otherwise wouldn't because of the casualness of notes. The disadvantage is that you might not catch something. The disadvantage is that you won't have a full record afterwards. And the disadvantage is that another disadvantage is that you may be so busy writing notes that you may miss something, right? I like to record things where the interview subject, basically I'll play it by ear, right? There are certain situations where I don't feel comfortable popping out the iPhone and recording what's being said. Most of the times I will try to record something if I'm in the right environment, if I have the person's permission. Part of that is because I've done this enough now and I'm confident that I can get people to let down their guard well enough that the voice recorder is not going to bother even people who are initially bothered with it. But that doesn't mean that I'm right. It's your level of comfort, what you're comfortable doing. Now, I do recommend that when you do this type of interviewing, you prepare a questionnaire beforehand. I have a schedule of questions. It doesn't have to be too long, and you don't have to stick to it exactly, all right? I did for an hour interview, I did about a 2-page schedule of questions that I wanted to get to in elite interviews with my Vermont people. I very rarely got to more than 3 or 4 questions in the course of the hour that I was talking to them, all right? The questionnaire basically serves as a starting point for you to initiate your conversation. It also gives you something to rely on if the conversation sort of falls flat. You can ask another question to prompt somebody talking. In the end, though, when you do interviewing like this, your questions should always change from what's on the questionnaire, okay? You're learning as you go along. They know more than what you do. And your goal is to keep a good conversation going. So they're going to say something during the course of the conversation that you're going to be like, oh man, that's interesting. Can you say a little more about that? And then boom, you're off. You should feel free to go off your questionnaire if it stays on a line of conversation that you think is helpful to the overall project. Okay? Good. All right. Don't be afraid to prompt people. Don't be afraid to ask them to go on. All right. A lot of times people will answer an initial question very briefly. If you say something like, could you say a little more about that? Or, oh, I see. Or even just, huh. Or even just pause, right? One of the most effective interviewing techniques you can have is if somebody finishes an answer is to just sit there and pause for like 5 seconds. Because a lot of people stop answering, but their mind is still going, their mind is still working. If you give a pause, it's kind of like a signal that they can keep talking if they want to. Now, you don't want to be creepy guy, right, and pause for like 10 seconds and you're just staring at them. But natural pauses in conversation are natural. They happen. If you shut up and let them keep talking, they'll oftentimes keep talking, all right? You'll be amazed if you do stuff like this, how quickly the time flies. Like I said, 3 or 4 questions was more than enough, basically, to get me through hour-long interviews, and still is. 3 or 4 questions with follow-ups, I'm set. That's as much as I'm going to do, okay? Again, people love to talk about themselves, and people love to talk about the thing that they're passionate about, that they spend the most time on. They're flattered that you want to know. The biggest skill in elite interviewing is being prepared, knowing what you want to get out of the interview beforehand, but then still being flexible enough to be spontaneous, because oftentimes it's when you react that you can get the best information. Now, let's talk about some things that we worry about in elite interviewing. Number 1 is reactivity, the Hawthorne effect, all right? It doesn't have to be dramatic. When I went to Vermont, the first interview that I did, I dressed like I normally do for class, right? So nice button-down shirt, nice pants, nice shoes, looking very much like I would do if I'm teaching a college class. Well, in Vermont, they say there are 5 seasons. There's winter, spring, summer, fall, and mud season. All right, which is between winter and spring when everything starts to melt and the whole state gets muddy. I was there in the middle of mud season, and it became pretty clear, obviously, that everybody in Vermont in mud season just wore hiking boots and jeans for the entire month. Guess what I wore to my next interview? Honestly, something a little nicer than the hoodie and t-shirt I have on right now. I might wear like a decent but casual button-down shirt or a sweater. Sweaters were good, right? Because everybody was wearing sweaters because it's still cold in Vermont. And jeans and hiking boots, right? You want to fit in, all right? Second thing, try to limit what you're telling people about your project. That helps with Hawthorne effect concerns. You never want to tell people your hypothesis, right? So you never tell people that, oh, I expect that you're going to tell me this. Because then they're either going to try to please you and tell you what you want to hear, and you've got some confirmation bias going on, or they'll be like, who's this guy who thinks he already knows all the answers before he comes talking to me? And they'll be a little hostile towards you, all right? I told people that I was interviewing in Vermont about, this was a study of Vermont school boards. And that's it. And if they asked a little bit more, I said something along the lines of, how Vermont school boards handle funding, or how Vermont school boards handle the many decisions they have to make. So I told them enough about my study that they'd be interested in it, and I certainly didn't lie to them, but I tried to keep the main part of my study away from them so that it didn't bias their answers. Third thing that you can do to fight the Hawthorne effect, you need to ask neutral questions, okay? What you ask and how you ask it can screw up answers if it's seen as argumentative as unfair. The classic, if un-PC example here is, how long have you stopped beating your wife? Obviously, that's going to engender a great deal of hostility, right? In addition to being sort of a trigger phrase, all right? You want to make your initial questions as bland and as clear, as short, as non-argumentative as possible. Okay? So, a lead question that I might ask in the Vermont School Board meetings was, tell me about what it's like to be a school board member. All right? That would be opening question number one. I might also ask, as sort of when that runs its course and I've done the follow-up and things like that, the next question I might ask is, so can you tell me a little bit about Act 60 and how it's affected your role? Now, Act 60 was what I cared about the most. That question was tremendously controversial in Vermont, and would open a whole 20-minute conversation and things like that. All right? These are things that you can do to minimize the potential of reactivity, to minimize Hawthorne effect concerns. Second thing that you have to worry about, though, in elite interviewing is you have a hard time generalizing, okay? By definition here, there's only so many elites you can get to because this is a time-consuming way to do research. Somebody's calling my parents. You're only interviewing a subset of the population. By definition, elite interview is too time-consuming to do more than a very tiny fraction of the population you care about. And ultimately, because of that, and because of the Hawthorne effect concerns, and because the inability to replicate the study, because you can't replicate, right? Because this is a natural conversation. By definition, if you're having a natural, unforced conversation with somebody, it's not something that you can replicate exactly. The issues of bias here are too troubling to ignore. Even if you do everything right, it's far too likely that some dynamic among you and the subject will influence the results. But ultimately that's okay, right? Because we're not trying to make causal claims here. You're just trying to generate new ideas, and you're trying to say, look, as best as I'm able, this is what I think's going on. Obviously, further testing is needed, right? Before we could say anything conclusively more broadly. And when you approach it like that, it's kind of liberating because you're not purporting to know everything here. You're just trying to purport almost to start a dialogue, right? To provide some evidence to a topic that may spur some additional large end studies down the road. Okay? With that, I'll sign up. I'm going to upload this, and I will. Next class will be online by Monday or Tuesday morning. So probably Monday, almost certainly Monday. But I'll email you when it does. Thanks, and have a great weekend, guys.